Hi, I am Don Hamilton, the National Bishop of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago. I welcome you to this PAWI initiative, answering 11 key questions to understand comprehensive sexuality education, CSE. Let me give you a quick back narrative. Somewhere around June 22nd, 2023, two books became national highlighters. I Am a Rainbow, You Are a Rainbow Too. Claims lit up social media that there are plans by the Ministry of Education to introduce these books in the school's curriculum through CSE. There were calls for boycotting the retailers, public protest on the street. But the average person and some professionals alike do not have a clue as to what is CSE and how it applies to our context. There was a swift response from the Ministry of Education. In June 22nd, Newsday 2023, it says they put out a disclaimer that these books are not on the school's book list and will not be part of the school's curriculum. In the light of this disclaimer set at variance with the public understanding and knowledge of CSE, what is our objective? We desire to clarify, educate, equip, and stimulate our understanding of CSE for informed discussions, informed decision-making, and a resolute response with like-minded citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and our region. Proverbs 18:13 says, "He who answers a matter before hearing it, it is folly and shame to him." Our objective in this session is not to address the how to answer this or that, or the what to say and do types of questions. Before we speak to what are we responding to? Too often, we listen to respond and not listen to first understand. We answer questions that nobody asks. Even when we answer what we assume men are thinking or planning, we may lose the strategic advantage in the conversation. Proverbs 29:11 says, "A fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it until afterwards." Another translation says, "A fool vents all of his emotions, but a wise man keepeth it until afterwards." How to use this material? This presentation is not for the 30 seconds or you lose me TikTok generation. It is not for the I am leaving my camera off because I am multitasking culture. It is not for the leave well alone, the Bible says this will happen. I call this the eschatological apathy spirit. It is not for I am old already, they can't move or fool me mentality. You see, the heights reached and kept by those who are pushing their global gender ideology were not attained by sudden flight, but they, while the rest of the world slept, were toiling upward in the night. So then, be focused. Take some time. Listen. Maybe not all at once, maybe not alone. You can pull the PTA together, your boards, youth groups, committees, executive. You can go on retreats, strategic planning meetings, Christian education and RI teachers meeting. Sit down, discuss, and formulate key questions and answers from your discussion having viewed this presentation. Now, initially, the primary target is the PAWI constituency and its membership. However, we are extending an invitation to all religious bodies, Christians, non-Christians, fellow citizens, concerned parents and individuals. Feel free to use this presentation to assist in any way possible to resist opening the door of the Trojan horse that has already breached and entered the city wall. Now, there are three important points of entry before we get to the meat of the matter. Number one, we cannot respond in ignorance. There are three types of collective mob ignorance. Number one, there is the ignorance leading to an uncontrolled, irrational frenzy that hurt innocent people. Do you remember Shakespeare, Julius Caesar? Well, in Acts 3, scene 3 on a street, after Mark Antony whipped up the crowd to avenge the death of Caesar, they took to the street and they encountered a citizen by the name of Sinner. And so the mob said to him, "Your name, sir, truly?" And Sinner says, "Truly, my name is Sinner." And then the crowd said, "Tear him to pieces. He is a conspirator." Sinner says, "I am Sinner the poet. I am Sinner the poet." The mob said, "Tear him for his bad verses. Tear him for his bad verses." Sinner the poet said, "I am not Sinner the conspirator." The mob said, "It is no matter. His name's Sinner. Pluck by his name out of his heart and turn him going." The mob then cried, "Tear him, tear him. Come, brands, ho, firebrands, to Brutus, to Cassius. Burn all, some to Decius' house, and some to Cascus, some to Ligarius. Away, go." They destroyed a man because of the similarity of a name. Sinner the poet, killed for Sinner the conspirator. Secondly, there is the ignorance of what is the mission of coming together. In 2 Samuel 15:11, it records Absalom's attempt at the overthrow of his father in a coup d'etat. It says, "And with Absalom went 200 men out of Jerusalem that were called, and they went in their simplicity, and they knew not anything." Ignorance of the mission of coming together. We cannot attend meetings without knowing the agenda. My friend, you can be ambushed by a blank slate. Number three, there is the ignorance as to why are we at a mass protest. There have been calls to mobilize and arrange a national march and protest by the Ministry of Education and in the city of Port-of-Spain to speak to the government and those in authority. True enough, Section 107 of the Summary Offences Act, Chapter 11.02, provisions are made for the organization of public marches. But even in the law, it is required that there be a declaration of the purpose of a march. We cannot perpetrate the collective ignorance of mass protests without knowledge of the purpose. If we don't know who are the real conspirators, if we don't know why we are attending a meeting, if we don't know the reason for a mass protest, it can only lead to mass confusion. You see, the Bible declares in Acts 19 and verse 32, the assembly was in confusion. Some were shouting one thing, some another. Most of the people did not even know why they were there. Could you imagine for 2 hours the community of Ephesus gathered and shouted, and most of the crowd were in ignorance? We cannot respond to national issues to create confusion in a mass potest. Number two, we cannot deny our dual citizenship. In Philippians chapter 3 and verse 20, the Apostle Paul declared, our citizenship is in heaven. Now, at the same time, in Acts 22 verses 22 to 30, Paul was asked, are you a Roman citizen? He declared, yes, I am. I was born a citizen. So as a citizen of heaven, we have our mandate to preach the gospel as Paul did. But as a citizen of earth, we have our mandate in terms of our civic responsibility. As a citizen of heaven, our diplomatic mandate is summed up in 2 Corinthians 5:20. We are ambassadors for Christ, as though God were pleading through us. We implore you as Christ, on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. As citizens of earth, our mandate is also spelled out. We must pray for those in authority, 1 Timothy 2:1-2. We must seek the peace of our nation and pray for it, 1 Timothy 2:2 and Jeremiah 29:7. We must submit to those in authority, Romans 13:1, 1 Peter 2:13 and 14. We are to honor and respect those in authority, Romans 13:7, 1 Peter 2:17. We must treat fellow citizens with respect, 1 Peter 2 and verse 17. We must pay our taxes, Matthew 22:21, Romans 13:6-7. You see, the benefits of the national contract for citizens are clear. The national contract of a state nation is spelled out in the Constitution. The political economy of our nation demands that every tax-paying citizen have equal rights to the national pie. When those who disagreed with Paul's religious conviction as an ambassador for Christ deemed him unfit to live, placed him in chains and carted him off to be beaten, Paul appealed to his citizenship to silence his detractors who were thinking really that their right trumps his. When you consult Acts 22:22-24, you would notice, and they gave audience unto this word, and then lifted up their voice and said, away with such a fellow from the earth, for he is not fit that he should live. And as they cried out and cast off their clothes and threw dust in the air, the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle and bade that he should be examined by scourging, that he might know wherefore they cried so against him. And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? The summary of our dual mandate is found in Matthew 22 and verse 21, where Jesus said, render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. You see, there will be an inevitable conflict of interest. Dual citizenship, dual allegiance, dual constitution, kingdom culture versus earthly culture. But how do we resolve this inevitable conflict? We must take a leaf from the ministry and life of Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were caught between the allegiance to their God and the allegiance to the state. They said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. The lines must be drawn in the sand. We ought to obey God rather than men. There comes a point in time that if the agenda, policies, laws, rulings of the state clearly contradict the laws of heaven, we must be willing, even unto imprisonment or death, to peacefully and respectfully disagree and disobey the laws and systems of men. Number 3, we cannot do it alone. It is quite in order to recognize the work of organizations and persons who ventured to place their strong concerns about the possible introduction of CSE in our schools into the domain of public conversation. For example, on March 24, 2022, in the Trinidad Guardian, the caption, "Protect the Health and Development of Caribbean Children." Here, the ELPIS Center pointed the nation to the sexual risk avoidance approach instead of the risky CSE program. We must also take note of the work of Archbishop Jason Gordon. In his 2022 Independence message, a just over 4 minutes video, he warns of the looming gender ideology threatening our nation and our school's curriculum, an ideology where ideas are more important than reality, he says. He also raised national awareness of the Concordat and the attempts at revisiting this agreement with denominational schools. We took note also of the Catholic News of July 2023. Here, Dr. Mary Rice Hanson, president of the Person and Identity Project, wrote a very important article, "Catholic Educators and Gender Conversation." The Council of Evangelical Churches, headed by Reverend Desmond Austin, raised their voices in the Newsday of 8th of July 2023. The caption, "Evangelical Churches Say No to Sexuality Education." We go across to the Newsday of June 26, 2023. The Mahasabha says no to sex education in its schools. Here, Vijay Maharaj, the acting general secretary of the Mahasabha, said in a news release that including sexuality and sexual health in primary schools could interfere with Hindus' belief. On July 20th, 2023, the Trinidad Express carried this caption, "Values-based teaching, not sex ed in schools." Here, the Open Bible Standard Churches of Trinidad and Tobago sounded the trumpet of the potential dangers associated with CSE. We must pause and recognize Reverend Winston Mansing and all those who work alongside him with the faith-based organizations. They also have echoed their deep concern about CSE. Now, since the furor with the books, some Muslim citizens gathered at the front of the Ministry of Education, St. Vincent Street, in their silent protests, saying no to CSE. In the light of the already vexing social climate, PAWI Trinidad and Tobago also registered its strong objection to CSE in our learning institutions. In the Newsday, July 2nd, 2023, the caption, Another religious group speaks out against sex education agenda. So ministers of religion, doctors, lawyers, school administrators, educators, teachers, social workers, politicians, taxi drivers, bankers, librarians, sanitation workers, parents, students, members of faith-based organizations, and prayer groups have all raised their voices as concerned citizens and nationals of Trinidad and Tobago against CSE, or the little that they know about CSE, they have expressed their reservation. So then, in this political economy of Trinidad and Tobago, could you imagine the national impact if the tax-paying electorate of all of these religious persuasions with other like-minded citizens bring together their piece of the constitutional pie and register an unequivocally loud statement against this international ideological pressure threatening to contaminate the future of our nation via the school bag? Stay tuned. To go further afield, we note the work of Caribbean Cause, Dr. Wayne and Doreen West, as they fight for the soul of the Caribbean people. And now, let us consider 11 key questions to understand comprehensive sexuality education. Question number 1. What are the source documents used in this presentation? Well, there are 2. 1. The International Planned Parenthood Federation, the IPPF, produced a framework for comprehensive sexuality education May 2006, updated January 2010. Very early in this document, a question is asked, how to use this document? And it is answered, it can also form the basis of future curricula in member association. Document number 2, the International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education, the ITG, produced by UNESCO 2018, which is rolled out in the form of a curriculum. There is a 2030 window and a 2030 agenda for the rolling out of the intent of this curriculum. While the International Planned Parenthood Federation and UNESCO are different bodies, could it be that the aspiration of the IPPF in 2010 that their document forms the basis of future curriculum were realized in the ITG document of 2018? Now, IPPF cites UNFPA as supporting and making input. However, the ITG does not reference or cite IPPF in their document. Noted, both documents have stated that they will regard the appropriateness of content, age, and context. The IPPF makes it clear that the program should be adapted to the age and stage of development of the target group. In the ITG, it is stated that the particular program must be adapted to the context of countries. It says the guidance emphasizes the need for programs that are informed by evidence adapted to the local context. On page 13 of ITG, these global benchmarks can and should be adapted to local context to ensure relevance. And then on page 16 and 17 of ITG, CSE is age and developmentally appropriate and culturally relevant and context appropriate. This seems to suggest that the relevant IPPF and ITG bodies want the reader to believe that they will be respecting the uniqueness of each nation's culture, beliefs, values, and the appropriateness of the content to age readiness and development. We must assess the CSE program in the light of these stated intent. Question number 2. Who are the supporting international bodies of the CSE? Both the IPPF and the ITG would cite these bodies. Number 1, Central and Regional and Member Association staff. Number 2, UNFPA. Number 3, World Health Organization. Number 4, PAHO. Number 5, Population Council. Number 6, SECAS. Number 7, the International HIV/AIDS Alliance. Number 8, the NAS Foundation. Number 9, the African Population and Health Research Center. Number 10, the African Regional Sexuality Research Center. Number 11, the World Association of Sexual Health. Number 12, UNESCO. Number 13, UNAIDS. Number 14, UNICEF. Number 15, UN Women. Once a nation have signed on to the Charter of the United Nations, these organizations operating in the respective countries reflects a global endorsement of CSE, and it is just a matter of time before the CSE agenda is rolled out in the curriculum in the member nations. Question number 3. What is comprehensive sexuality education? We would consider 4 responses. 1, it is a holistic approach to sexuality education. 2, it is a rights-based approach to sexuality education. 3, it is a curriculum-based process of teaching and learning about sexuality education. And 4, it is an informed evidence approach to sexuality education. Let us consider these 4 windows in turn. 1, a holistic approach to sexuality education. This approach would focus on the dimensions of personhood. So it will speak to knowledge, skills, attitudes, values, emotions, relationships. Let's consider what the document states. Comprehensive sexuality education seeks to equip young people with the knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values they need to determine and enjoy their sexuality physically and emotionally, individually, and in relationships. It views sexuality holistically and social development. It recognizes that information alone is not enough. Young people need to be given the opportunity to acquire essential life skills and develop positive attitudes and values. Comprehensive sexuality education covers a broad range of issues relating both to the physical and biological aspects of sexuality and the emotional and social aspects. It recognizes and accepts all people as sexual beings and is concerned with more than just prevention of diseases or pregnancy. CSE programs should be adapted to the age and stage of development of the target group. Number 2, a rights-based approach to sexuality education. Here it would focus on human rights, and so the IPPF recognizes the rights of all young people to enjoy sex and express their sexuality in the way that they choose. The IPPF Youth Policy states, IPPF is committed to promoting, protecting, and upholding the sexual and reproductive health rights of all young people. This includes a right to information and education on sexuality, and a right to pleasure and confidence in relationships and all aspects of their sexuality. Number 3, a curriculum-based process. This then would focus on teaching and learning within a curriculum about sexuality. CSE is a curriculum-based process of teaching and learning about the cognitive, emotional, physical, and social aspects of sexuality. It promotes structured learning about sex and relationships in a manner that is positive, affirming, and centered on the best interests of the young person. It aims to equip children and young people with knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values that will empower them to realize their health, well being, and dignity, develop respectful social and sexual relationships, consider how their choices affect their own well being and that of others, and understand and ensure the protection of their rights throughout their lives. And number four, an evidence informed approach to sexuality education. Here, it will focus on the acclaimed research that was done to show that CSC is successful. This revised and fully updated edition of the International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education benefits from a new review of the current evidence and reaffirms the position of sexuality education within a framework of human rights and gender equality, says the foreword of the ITG. Number four, why the need for comprehensive sexuality education? The IPPF focuses on the needs of young people. They are many: emotional, social health of young people, sexually transmitted infections, HIV infections, abortion, adolescence motherhood, suicide, sexual violence. And when you look at the current state of affairs for young people, there are conflicting messages and norms about sex and sexuality. Sex is seen as a negative associated with guilt, fear, and disease, while in some quarters it is seen as positive and desirable. Young people lack the skills, information, and awareness of their rights. Young people feel they lack the voice and input in policies and the decision-making processes. In the light of that, there are two major objections to the response to these issues. You see, traditionally, there have been two approaches to dealing with these youth issues. One, young people are taught about abstinence, and two, young people are taught about the reproductive capacities of their bodies. CSE have taken serious issues and objection to these two traditional approaches. They have said abstinence-only programs are ineffective. There is an increasing evidence to show that abstinence-only programs are ineffective, although some governments and organizations continue to promote them. IPPF strongly discourage sexuality education programs that focus only on abstinence. The second objection: when you focus exclusively on the reproductive aspects of adolescent sexuality, it does not respond to the needs of young people. Which leads us to question 5. What does CSE propose as the alternative answer for dealing with youth and children sexuality? 5 things are proposed. 1. The rights of young people to be informed about sexuality and reproductive health. 2. The rights of young people for sexual expression. 3. The rights of young people for sexual fulfillment. 4. The rights of young people for sexual pleasure. And 5. The rights of young people to make their own choices. Now, they have made it clear that this represents a shift in the way the traditional methods are rolled out that focuses on exclusively the reproductive aspect of the adolescence of sexuality. You need to keep this in mind, that they noted that it is a shift from the traditional approach. What then are some of the essentials of this shift? The IPPF covers a section that deals with 7 essential components. I will pull out 4. four important components of CSE. The program should focus on gender, where young people must be taught the difference between gender and sex. 2, essential would be sexual and reproductive health and HIV. Here it is. Young people must be taught how to use condoms and given the option in information as it relates to legal and safe abortion. 3, essential. Young people must understand their sexual rights and their sexual citizenship. So the approach is rights-based and they must appreciate the difference in their sexual identities. Number 4, pleasure. Young people must be taught that sex is for enjoyment. You can have safe sex practices and pleasure. Taught about use of masturbation, love, lust, and relationship. Since there is a shift, how is CSE strategically packaged? Because CSE is a clear shift from abstinence-only message and teaching about human biology, they had to find ways to package the program to bind and attract the public to accept their focus on sexual information, sexual expression, sexual fulfillment, and personal choices of children and youth. So, the strategy is rolled out. It is packaged as a rights-based approach. That is, legally binding in the frame of human rights, using the UN Convention on Human Rights. If you oppose this particular approach, you then could be charged with violating human rights. 2, strategy and evidence-informed approach. What this is suggesting is that we have done our research and we have the evidence that the approach is successful. Strategy number 3, a curriculum-based approach. Here, this is framing CSE in the form of teaching and learning. It is rolled out in a very attractive curriculum. Number 4, disease prevention approach. This particular package suggests then our approach have seen the reduction in HIV and other health-related issues. So then, as a rights-based approach, using the vehicle of the United Convention on the Rights of the Child, certain articles are cited. Article 24, rights to the highest attainable health and health facilities. Article 17, the rights to information which allows them to make decisions including family planning. Article 12, the right to be heard, express opinions, and involve in decision-making process. Article 29, the right to education to help to understand and to be tolerant towards others. Article 2, the right not to be discriminated against. In the summary note of the ITG, it is said, in addition to being informed by the latest evidence, the guidance is firmly grounded in numerous international human rights conventions that stress the right of every individual to education and to the highest attainable standard of health and well-being. So then, these human rights conventions are noted: the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the International Covenant on Economics, Social and Cultural Rights, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And so in the appendices, in Appendix 1, it states that the international agreements, instruments, and standards related to comprehensive sexuality education, and 14 international agreements are cited in the appendices. Number 2, an evidence-informed approach. The foreword of the ITG says, this revised and fully updated edition of the International Technical Guidance on Sexuality Education benefits from new review of the current evidence. And so, when you ask what really is the current evidence that the program is successful, On page 28, it is noted that between 2008 to 2016, these are the conclusions of the success of the program. It says, this research reaffirms that curriculum-based sexuality education programs contribute to the following outcomes. So these are the indicators that the program is successful. 1. Delayed initiation of sexual intercourse by young people, decreased frequency of sexual intercourse by young people, decreased numbers of sexual partners by young people, reduced risk-taking, increased use of condoms, increased use of contraception. Number 3, a curriculum-based process of teaching and learning. In the ITG from pages 34 to 44, there is a structured curriculum around 8 topics, 4 age groupings: 5 to 8, 9 to 12, 12 to 15, 15 to 18 plus. And the 8 topics are: 1. Relationships. 2. Values, rights, culture, and sexuality. 3. Understanding gender. 4. Violence and staying safe. 5. Skills for health and well-being. 6. The human body and development. 7. Sexuality and sexual behavior. 8. Sexuality and reproductive health. Number 4, the disease prevention approach. In the IPPF, it is noted member associations have identified the need to link HIV prevention and education with sexual education in a way that addresses the specific needs of young people, especially those living with HIV/AIDS. Question number 8. How far is the intended reach of CSE? In the ITG, page 19, schools play a central role in the provision of CSE. 2. Non-formal and community-based settings are also important opportunities to provide curriculum-based CSE. I took note in IPPF that CSE can complement an existing curriculum in and out of schools. For example, in waiting rooms, youth clubs, hairdressing salons, taxi drivers, community drama, media events, incorporating it into traditional rituals. Question number 9. How did they plan to roll out CSE? In the IPPF, I am drawing from the section that deals with principles of good practice. I will pull out just 4. 1. Participatory methods. 2. Training. 3. Institutional commitment and support. And 4. Resource and materials. Participatory method focuses then on the children and young people. It says, use methods that encourage children and young people to participate in learning, such as active methods. Methods include using small group, work to explore scenarios and dilemmas, drama and role play, writing songs, poems, discussions, and debate. Training focuses on the teachers and educators. Select and train educators who are committed to CSE and the needs and rights of young people. Ensure educators have adequate training and ongoing support. Institutional commitment and support. This then will focus on organizations. Assess staff attitudes and readiness for CSE and for working with young people. The staff of the entire organization should be informed and committed to the project and to working with young people as equal partners. CSE programmers are more effective if they are integrated into the other areas of the organization's work. And then providing comprehensive sexuality education training. It should be noted, those who deliver sexuality education, whether one-to-one or in groups, need the necessary information, skills, attitudes in order to be so effective. Training, ongoing support and supervision, and access to resources and materials are essential for this. And so in both documents, a list of resources are provided. Question number 10. Are parents included in this shift of sexuality education? In providing comprehensive sexuality education in the IPPF, it says, a wide range of people are likely to be involved in sexuality education. But for IPPF and its member association, the key players are service providers, peer educators, parents, teachers, and other educators. This is the first time parents are mentioned and seem to have been stuck into the document as participating in comprehensive sexuality education. In the ITG, however, parents and guardians are included in the topic 1 dealing with family and family relationships on page 38. Question number 11. Did they expect opposition from faith-based organizations and members of the community? In the IPPF, dealing with principles of good practice, here's what is said. Challenges. Map out the challenges and opposition to CSE and develop a plan of how to work constructively to overcome these. For example, there may be concerns about the reactions of community or faith groups that seem to speak for itself. But it further notes, IPPF believes that sexual taboos as a result of culture and religion are not insurmountable barriers to broadening the scope of sexuality education. And now, having examined these 11 questions, we must now turn our attention to 10 key observations flowing from these questions and answers that we have just covered. Number 1, not everything in the CSE curriculum is bad or negative. The attempt to address the real issues of youth sexuality in the face of the deafening silence and inadequate responses by both the religious and non-religious group gives credence to the statement, I like the way that I am doing it better than the way you are not doing it. The pedagogical package of 8 topics are relevant and worth exploring. They intend to have content adaptable to context and values are also noted. Again, any convention, rights, policy, curriculum, and program protecting our children and women from incest, rape, abuse, human trafficking, violence, and such like must be commended and supported. Any initiative to stop gender-based, domestic, and intimate partner violence, clergy sexual abuse, bullying, twisted and male-female culturally accepted violence must be endorsed by all stakeholders. On the other hand, we must not be naive. All the proponents of the harmful gender ideology are linked together in some way or the other. They are planted in every organization and will seek to use the systems to advance their own nefarious agenda, even in the schools. With that in mind, it is reasonable to say we must avoid confusing the CSE curriculum and agenda with the LGBTQI, non-binary, or even the pedophilia agenda. There are good and well-meaning persons working in the UN, FPA, and CSE program without any harmful gender ideology. They just want to make life better and safer for our young people. Knowingly or unknowingly, then, CSE inadvertently have provided the conduit, legitimacy, and platform for the LGBTQI, non-binary militants, advocates, sympathizers, and the nonchalant citizens to use the language of rights of the child for information, rights of the child for sexual expression, rights of the child for pleasure, rights of the child for fulfillment, to sexualize our children with their gender ideology. You see, when you mix a toxin with a juice, the unsuspecting minds are unable to distinguish color, taste, and content and lethality. Well, listen to this clip from Family Life International, which enlisted some of our Jamaican colleagues also fighting the scourge seeking to make foothold in our country. Take key note of how UNICEF rolled out in Mexico one of the 7 essential components of CSE, that is, the agenda for pleasure.
UNICEF was also found to be promoting the sexual pleasure agenda. For example, on page 89 of a UNICEF-published Sexual and Reproductive Health Manual for Pregnant Teens in Mexico, UNICEF listed situations in which one can obtain sexual pleasure that included sexual responses directed towards inanimate objects, animals, minors, and non-consenting persons.
The way they're doing this is to actually penetrate our schools. And so once it changes at the policy level, then we'll probably have no control over what is taught in the schools and who teaches it.
Now remember, both bodies suggest that they will regard the appropriateness of content, age, and context, that the programs should be adapted to the age and stage of development of the target group. Is this the way UNICEF is adapting the content to the age and appropriateness of the target group? It stands to reason, my friend. Observation number 2. There is a conspicuous absence of the spiritual dimension of personhood in both definitions provided by IPPF and ITG. When we appreciate holistically personhood, we are physical, emotional, social, mental, and spiritual. And so, when you look at both definitions, this omission of the spirituality of personhood is of concern. Now, in chapter 2 in the ITG, an entire chapter is dedicated to understanding CSE. It acclaims that it is providing a new definition with key consideration. Yet, only once the word spiritual is used in an insert box, as they admitted that the concept of sexuality is complex and not simple to define. For faith-based organization, spirituality is fundamental to understanding personhood, and all other dimensions flows from this understanding. Number 3, a disguised form of education. The Trinidad and Tobago Council of Evangelical Churches in their Newsday article says, the council continues to take a stand against the advancement of this form of education, regardless of how it is disguised, be it life skills, after-school programs, gender-based violence, prevention, or health. CSE instructions seek to ensure that children have unfettered access to comprehensive sexual information that leaves no sexual knowledge behind. Policymakers from powerful nations believe that children are to be indoctrinated in queer theory and transgender rights and will be given the green light to experiment sexually and to access abortion and contraception without their parents' knowledge. The mandate is to establish rights for children as sexually autonomous beings and aggressively calls for the lowering of the age of consent, which will remove protection from our young people and soften the ground for pedophilia. Parental rights and religious freedom to raise their children in accordance with their beliefs are under attack. It is seen as a barrier to the implementation of CSE. Observation number 4. Comprehensive sex education is risky. Under the caption CSE is risky, An excerpt of the original article of ELPIS Center of March 2022, Protect the Health and Development of Caribbean Children, is actually repeated in the Trinidad and Tobago Guardian in July 2023. The ELPIS Center noted, parents are often informed that so-called comprehensive sex education offer the best approach to address this problem. Of course, it's dealing with the teenage sex problem. In reality, these programs often add to the problem by promoting a curricula that normalize teen sex. The CSE approach ignores a needy priority on risk avoidance and instead primarily focuses on merely reducing the physical risk of teen sex without adequately addressing the many other possible consequences of that activity. Number 5, a need for due diligence. Dr. Mary Rice Hanson in the Catholic News makes a very sterling point in her article, Catholic Educators and Gender Conversation. Dr. Rice Hanson is on point when she said, gender ideology was being woven into books by major publishers. It was incumbent on the persons leading Catholic schools, and I dare say other important institutions, to take the issue seriously so that they were not unintentionally embedding gender ideology into their institutions simply through carelessness or not doing due diligence. Schools are encouraged to do language audit of their handbooks, forms, and communication materials to parents so that these are reflective of the truth. Now, we would remember the disclaimer by the Ministry of Education about the Rainbow Books not being part of the school's curriculum. However, on a higher level, in July 2023, there were many distressed teachers who recognized that CXC, the Caribbean Examination Council, intentionally and surreptitiously sneak gender ideology into the revised social studies curriculum. Let's talk about this. In July 2023, 5th to the 6th, CXC hosted a teacher orientation workshop. This workshop was designed to roll out the revised social studies curriculum, a 79-page booklet or document, and it is suggested that it would be effective for examination from May to June 2025. When you look at the organization of the syllabus, there are two major sections. Section A, individual, family, and society. Two subcategories, individual and family, and society and governance. Section B, sustainable development and use of resources. Two subsection, development and use of resources, and regional development. The topics are arranged in a particular format. There is the specific objective of the topic. Then there is the content of the topic. Then there is the unifying concepts of the topic. And then you would have the suggested teaching and learning activities of the topic. When we examine section A, individual, family, and society on page 16, we look at specific objective 9A. Examine causes and effects of contemporary social issues that influence and affect persons in Caribbean family life. We go horizontally and we look at the content that is to be covered in that specific objective. It says, vulnerable persons include persons living with diabetes, children, elderly, mentally ill, person with special needs, and slip under the door and the LGBTQI community. Now, when you consider the suggested teaching and learning activities for these topics of persons living with diabetes, children, elderly, mentally ill, person with special needs, and the LGBTQI community, this is what is expected of teachers as they interact with their students. One, divide the class into groups to be assigned to different social issues. Students explain cause and effect and possible solutions or strategies for dealing with the social issues. Two, have students prepare a plan to tackle a named social issue. The plan should include aims, objective group, targets group, and resource needed. Three, have students develop a scrapbook with statistical data and newspaper articles on the two social issues in their country to determine the prevalence of the issue, examine trends, and describe and evaluate the strategies used within the country to deal with this social issue. And number four, have students compare the social issues researched within the territory of another Caribbean country. If you took keen notice, you would realize that what CXC did, they slipped under the door, outside and off the radar. Students and teachers must confront dealing with the LGBTQI community. While all men are to be respected and all men are created in the image and likeness of Almighty God, were parents informed that the LGBTQI discussion was placed into the curriculum of social studies? Why were the teachers alarmed and distressed? It clashed with many of their own value systems and convictions. Some were fearful about job security. Is the Ministry of Education and the government, are they aware of the extent to which this simple insertion have disturbed the education system? We must be informed and raise the alarm very loud and clear. You see, in doing due diligence, we appreciate the warning sounded by the Open Bible Standard Churches of Trinidad and Tobago that while we affirm the inherent rights of children, including the right to education and the express of their sexuality, we believe that these rights must be balanced with the responsibility of parents to nurture and protect their children according to moral principles. As a faith community, we see the need to be vigilant in the discharge of our duties as watchmen and guardians of morality and of the natural family, and to request that the CSE be rejected by the Ministry of Education. Yet it was slipped under the door, slipped into the curriculum as a revision of social studies so that our children, our teachers are confronted with the reality that this is what will be taught in schools, in the classroom, and you must have participatory involvement. We must sound a warning with this observation. Observation number 6. School boards may lack the desire or collective willpower to resist the aggressive attempts of perverting our children. Remember, one of the proposals of CSE is a rights for sexual expression. This plays right into the hands of sexual predators. Take, for example, in February 2023, a school in Alaska, a book was slipped into the school's library, and a parent found the book and decided to take it to the school board. The book encouraged and sought to teach young children how to show their body parts online safely by hiding specific identifying marks. The school board voted 5-2 to shut the dad down for reading from this book, saying he's using the wrong channel to register his concerns. Number 7, the role of international agreements. Follow the money and follow the paper trail. It will help us explain how nations that have signed treaties, agreements, and alliances and allegiances to the UN Convention, they are under obligation to come good on these agreements at some point in time or the other, lest economic sanctions are imposed upon them. Number 8, we must take note of the clear signal of endorsement by our local retailers and authors. This observation cannot be understated. Having examined the furor with the books, the Newsday in July 1st, 2023, carried an article getting the reaction and the response from retailers and a few authors under the caption, "No to book bans, yes to representation." Listen to these comments. Nigel Khan said, "Take your protest to the publishers or the UN. We should not ban and refuse education. It's like shooting the messenger." Joan Dial says, "Books are carried by the LGBTQ authors in the bookstore all the time. There was never an objection. Don't support the boycott." Radia Ali says, "We carry books based on genre and customer requests. The general popularity and there's no objection before. Customers are free to purchase their likes because it's a source of knowledge." Listen then to these three authors. Andre Bagu says, "It's not the first time concerns for children had been weaponized to perpetrate bigotry. It's a myth that children are incapable of understanding the world around them." David, by pen name, not his real name, "Children must see themselves represented in the stories," and he calls for the fostering of the watchword tolerance. Lisa Allen Agostini says, "With the books, there was much fear based on paranoia because mechanisms are in place to protect your children." She further stated, "Exposure to queer literature and stories and characters will not contaminate your children, but will make them less hateful." Now, since CSE is an open door for ultimately Drag Queen Hour, and as the Council of the Evangelical Church put it, a vehicle for unfettered sexual expressions, must we accept the Pontius Pilate "washing my hands in the basin" response by Mr. Khan? "I don't manufacture the white powder, I only sell it"? Must we become complacent in the name of "it's only education," that falsehood by Miss Dayal and Ali? Must our children be allowed to see themselves in the stories invented by some men with their own perverted, minor, attracted orientation? Must we be intimidated by the automated diatribe of Mr. Andrew Bagu that our concerns for our children are weapons to perpetrate bigotry? Must we accept the Trojan horse of Lisa Allen Agostini that exposure to queer ideology and characters will not contaminate our children but make them less hateful? I think not. Number 9, aspects of the language, mission, vision, projects, education, and training of the Family Planning Association of Trinidad and Tobago are curiously similar to that of the IPPF and the ITG. Let's look at their mission: to ensure that every person living in Trinidad and Tobago acknowledges the rights to the healthy expression of their sexuality, and that all persons, including the most vulnerable, are supported in realizing this right. Their vision: FPATT is a leader in the Caribbean region, promoting and ensuring sexual and reproductive health and rights for all. The FPA projects, four are mentioned online. 1. Bridging access to service. 2. Give a gift of health. 3. The road check. And 4. Advancing sex ed. We need to explore number 4, advancing sex ed. In Advancing Sex Ed, the website says, FPATT Comprehensive Sexuality Education Pilot Project aims to equip young people with the knowledge and the skills to enable them to better understand the responsibilities and risks associated with their sexual and reproductive health. Note this: the school setting provides an ideal environment to reach young people with sexuality education before they become sexually active. Furthermore, providing teachers with the relevant information specifically tailored to build their capacity will contribute to their effective engagement with young people and the provision of age-appropriate information, which will support more responsible and informed decisions about sexual, reproductive health, and overall well-being. Then, what we do, our services. The website noted education and training. A cadre of qualified professionals facilitate training workshops for private and public institutions in areas including, note this, sexual and reproductive health for healthcare professionals, peer education, and comprehensive sexuality education. We need to go back in time to discover what did the Family Planning Association of Trinidad and Tobago, what they have provided for training and education. Now, in 2000, there was a workshop held at Hotel Normandy in St. Anne's, Trinidad. Family Planning Association Sexuality Education Workshop. Now, the Trinidad Guardian, March 3rd, 2000, had this caption: Therapists promise new safe sex. Touching, fondling, petting are the way to go. Young people do not want to hear about abstinence. This, in fact, focuses on the issue of the education provided by the Family Planning Association. Let's look at this article. And while a bit lengthy, permit me to read because I think it's worth the read. The article starts: Intercourse. Sexual activity without intercourse should be taught in school as a way of reducing pregnancy, abortion, and HIV/AIDS among adolescents, stated an international sex educator in Port of Spain yesterday. Israeli sexuality educator Gila Brunner was speaking at the Family Planning Association Sexuality Education Workshop at the Hotel Normandy, St. Anne's. The all-day workshop was targeted at trainers and related personnel in the field of sexual and reproductive health. It was also held to coincide with next Wednesday's International Women's Day. Young people do not want to hear about abstinence, but when you give them an option such as intercourse, where they can be intimate with one another without intercourse, they welcome it, Brunner says. She explained, intercourse includes sexual activities other than intercourse, such as masturbation, kissing, petting, oral stimulation, manual stimulation, genital rubbing. Brunner, a sexual education trainer at the Tel Aviv University School of Education, has made sexual education presentation at international scientific meetings for the past 20 years. She said, the belief that educating young people about sex and encouraging them to use a condom promoted promiscuity was false. She said worldwide research showed that if adolescents have knowledge about contraceptives and access to counseling centers, teenage pregnancy rates would be lower, abortion rates would drop, and the average age of teenage becoming sexually active would increase. Brunner said sex education should start in kindergarten and begin with talks on what is a friend and what is a family. You have to start sex education programs with the children when they are in kindergarten and teach them about true friendship and family life. If you want to change the name from sex education to family life education, said Brunner, adding a person's sexual energy begins from birth. She said the only way to curb the increase in teenage pregnancy and HIV/AIDS among the young population was to educate them. She pointed out sex education was not limited to intercourse and contraceptive, but on life, love, and spirituality. She said it should be stressed to parents and religious leaders that sex education as part of the school curriculum did not mean teaching children to have intercourse, but about life and making educated decisions. In opening the workshop, Donna Da Costa Martinez, FVA Executive Director, noted the timeliness of the event. She said, recent newspaper headlines like the sex versus abstinence in Wednesday's Guardian highlight the critical sexual and reproductive issues currently affecting adults and young people. Now, the curious features of the current lingo of the Family Planning Association must come under cross-examination in the light of the past. Is intercourse, fondling, touching, petting, rubbing of genitals, oral stimulation? Is this the right to the healthy expression of their sexuality that the family planning was thinking about? Is this the aims to equip young people with the knowledge and skills? Is this the skills they were referring to? Is the touching, fondling, petting the way to go? Is that the relevant information that teachers would be carted out of the classroom to be taught? The Family Planning Association must answer these questions. Observation number 10. The management of disease model. The approach of CSE to social ills is not new. In social health care for drug addicts, they have accepted that many addicts will not and cannot abstain from the use of drugs. This has resulted in the spread of HIV/AIDS through the sharing of contaminated needles. The solution? Needle exchange programs based on a harm reduction approach. This approach seeks to minimize the risk of infection. So, they increase the availability of clean, sterile injection equipment and remove contaminated needles from circulation, and also started the distribution of condoms. In some countries, drugs are decriminalized as a form of harm reduction approach. This approach then is drawn from the management of disease model. They have accepted that they cannot deal with the root of the problem of sex and drugs. So they set goals to manage the problem. They then measure the success of the management programs by what they call evidence-informed approach to drug addiction, teen pregnancies, and spread of HIV/AIDS. You would remember what was rolled out as the indicators of the success of CSE. Reduction in transmission of HIV/AIDS and other STI, delayed initiation of sexual intercourse, decreased frequency of sexual intercourse, decreased numbers of sexual partners, reduced risk taking, increased use of condom, increased use of contraception. World thinkers and framers of harm reduction approach must go back and consider this failed approach in Portugal. Portugal, for many years, noted as a nation one of the highest drug epidemics globally. Yet, in July 2023, the Washington Post carried an article entitled, "Once Hailed for the Decriminalization of Drugs, Portugal is now having doubts." Let me cite from this article. Portugal decriminalized all drug use, including marijuana, cocaine, and heroin, notice, in an experiment that inspired similar efforts elsewhere. But now, police are blaming a spike in the number of people who use drugs for a rise in crime. In one neighborhood, state issued paraphernalia, powder blue syringe caps, packets of citric acid for diluted heroin, litters sidewalks outside an elementary school. You see, this approach goes back to the idea of teach people, give them information, educate them, and allow them to make their choice. Here's what the article said. Addicted persons must understand that they would be referred to the police for dissuasion commissions. For the most troubled people, authorities can impose sanctions, including fines and recommended treatment. But you know what? They must decide to attend. It is voluntary. Portugal became a model for progressive jurisdictions around the world embracing drug decriminalization, such as the state of Oregon. But now there is a talk of fatigue. Police are less motivated to register people who misuse drugs, and there are year-long waits for state funds, rehabilitating treatment, even as the number of people seeking help has fallen dramatically. The returning force of visible urban drug use, meanwhile, is leading the mayor and others here to ask an explosive question. Is it time to reconsider this country's globally hailed drug model? They came up with the verdict, but even proponents of decriminalization here admit that something is going wrong. The message of the Bible is not merely management of disease, not education, not dissuasion commissions, and leaving it up to the choice of powerless people. The message of the Bible speaks to transformation by the power of the Holy Spirit and the Word of God. In addition, we cannot dismiss the message of abstinence coupled with personal discipline. But as the Open Bible Standard Churches of Trinidad and Tobago stated, we must affirm our commitment to the absolutes from the Holy Bible as the basis for our beliefs and practices. Consequently, we affirm the Bible's emphasis on personal sexual discipline, including appropriate abstinence for all persons, regardless of age or marital status. Young people, we must resist the lie told by Dr. Brunner. She said that young people do not want to hear about abstinence, but want the option of intercourse. She is not speaking on behalf of the thousands of youths who love God and desire a life of holiness and sexual purity. So it's time to kick back, young soldiers. It's time to kick back, young ambassadors for Christ. Finally, we must speak to the resolve of the International Planned Parenthood Federation in their 2010 document. They have declared, "We will not retreat from doing everything we can to safeguard these important choices and rights for current and future generations." Leadership and members of PAWI, fellow leaders and believers of Christian denomination, fellow religious ministers and members of non-Christian organizations, fellow citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, teachers, educators, librarians, responsible retailers, students and parents, if they will not retreat, must we capitulate to the international ideological gender war? I think not. In the light of the sexual pleasure agenda warring against our seed, we need men and women of courage who will stand by their conviction and fight for their children. Employing the words of Anne in the movie The Patriot, as she sought to mobilize her people to fight against the British, we appeal to fellow citizens and ambassadors. Anne says, "Will you now, when you are needed most, stop at only words? Is that the sort of men you are? I ask only that you act upon the beliefs of which you have so strongly spoken and in which you so strongly believe." Let us close with a stirring appeal from our colleagues Carol Richards and Philippa Davies in the clip from Family Life International.
The material was exposed by one individual, and the entire nation got wind, and as a result of it, it had to be withdrawn.
Every well-thinking adult must be vigilant and must stand as a gatekeeper to our children's development.
Band together and find ways to stop it from entering your country.